I'd like to call the meeting to order. There we go. So we will hold over the approval of the minutes until our next meeting in the absence of a quorum. The second item is the report of the Vac Chair. So, good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Naomi Zauderer. I serve as a member of the Campaign Finance Board and as chair of the CFB's Voter Assistance Advisory Committee. This committee is established in the city charter to advise the New York City Campaign Finance Board on its voter engagement efforts. In addition to holding meetings and hearings like this one every other month, the VAC publishes an annual report on voting in New York City and recommends legislative and administrative changes to improve city elections. We have a very compelling list of presenters lined up this evening. We also want to provide any members of the public with the opportunity to speak about their voting experience in the state primary elections last month. We're aware that many people experienced problems at their poll sites during the September 13th primary. The Voter Assistance Advisory Committee is here to offer advice for mitigating these issues in the future and to relay these concerns to the New York City Board of Elections. First, I would like to acknowledge that New York City voters cast nearly 3 times the number of votes in the state primary elections last month compared to the statewide primary held in 2014. That's an outstanding improvement. For tonight's meeting, yes. For tonight's meeting, we want to better understand this increase in turnout and discuss ways that we can support efforts to sustain and improve upon this increase. We'll start the meeting by hearing more detail about the CFB's nonpartisan voter engagement initiative, NYC Votes, and its efforts to increase participation in the lead up to the primary election, including statistics from Get Out the Vote phone banking, advertising, email and text campaigns, social media, and other initiatives. We also want to learn more about the innovative ways that our partners are working to increase participation in elections, including National Voter Registration Day, which occurred on the 25th of last month. The Campaign Finance Board's voter assistance staff coordinated over 500 voter registration drives across the city on this single day of action, including drives at every public library branch, every YMCA facility, and every City University of New York campus. Dozens of nonprofit, corporate, and government partners made this magnitude of registration drives possible. Through initiatives like National Voter Registration Day, we are well on our way to helping thousands more people register to vote and update their registration ahead of the deadline on October 12th. Due to New York's closed primary system, October 12th is also the last date that New Yorkers can change their party registration status in order to vote in the party primary elections in 2019. If you missed out on last month's elections, please consider making this change to ensure you can fully participate in every election. Bottom line, New Yorkers must be registered by October 12th if they wish to vote in the next election on November 6th. In closing, I want to follow up on a matter of previous business. Earlier this year, during a public meeting of the Campaign Finance Board in April, I expressed disappointment over the decision to include a question regarding citizenship status in the 2020 census. A coalition of 18 state attorney generals, including New York, filed a lawsuit to block the federal government from adding such a question shortly after the citizenship question was announced. The Voter Assistance Advisory Committee sent a letter to Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross urging him not to include the question in the census. The committee feels strongly that the inclusion of this question will adversely affect our charter-mandated work with underrepresented groups, will result in nationwide electoral malapportionment and maldistribution of public services. U.S. District Judge Jesse Furman of the Southern District of New York has already scheduled a tentative trial date in the lawsuit for November 5th. We will continue to monitor that suit very closely. And with that, I will call on the Campaign Finance Board's Executive Director, Amy Loprest, for her report.
Thank you, Naomi. So as most of people know, last month, the Mayor's Charter Revision Commission voted on 3 questions that will appear on the ballot this fall at the general election. They are questions relating to reforms in campaign finance, to create a civic engagement commission, and reforms to the way that community boards are run. The Campaign Finance Board is in the process of producing a print voter guide that will go to every household with the registered voter in the city to explain what those initiatives are. We will also have on our online voter guide a place for people to submit reasons to vote yes or no, pro and con statements on the digital online voter guide. So everyone should look in their mail for that voter guide, and look for the digital one to see statements from your fellow New Yorkers, pro and con on those initiatives. Also remember that when you have a ballot initiative, that they are on the back side of the ballot, so people should turn over their ballot and make sure that they vote on those initiatives. Today, Eric Friedman, our Assistant Executive Director for Public Affairs, testified on our behalf in support of a package of City Council bills directed towards the Department of Corrections and Department of Probation to improve the information that is provided to their client base about registering and voting as a incarcerated person. So looking forward to movement on that package of bills, which will only further support the work that our voter assistance unit has been doing with both of those city agencies over the course of a number of years. So with that, I will turn to Onita Garrard-Bears to give her report.
Good evening, everyone. Listening to both of the reports that I just heard from Amy and Naomi, it made me feel like, wow, this is kind of the moment we've been waiting on, right? We've been waiting to report that there was an increase in voter participation at the polls, so that's something to be happy about. We reported that we have not only the mayor's office focusing on voter engagement and increasing voter participation, but the city council also doing that. So I think we are getting closer to where we want to be. So I'm happy about that. Also, September 13th showed that when New Yorkers have choices, they go to the polls. New Yorkers show that when they have information, they go to the polls. And they also show that they know to go to the polls to take their issues to the polls. So that is what we want to capitalize on at this point and to really leverage. Today, I'd like to share my time with the members of the Voter Assistance Unit. And all of these wonderful things that you've heard about so far, they will begin to tell you more in depth. So you can, there's some over here too if you want, okay? They love sticking together. So in order, you will hear from Sabrina Castillo, from Sean O'Leary, Summer Griffin, and Matthew George Pitt. So thank you, guys.
Thank you. My name is Sabrina Castillo. I'm the Voter Assistance Manager for the Voter Assistance Unit, and I'm going to be reporting on National Voter Registration Day. Naomi pretty much recapped what we did, so we were very excited to have on strong partners like the New York Public Library, CUNY universities, and the YMCA. Those are some large programs. Together throughout the day in New York City, 3,362 people were registered through some of our partners. So we're excited about that. I would like to say that we did kick off with partners such as like Jack and Jill at the Utica subway station. We registered some people there. Our goal for National Voter Registration Day was to make it accessible for all New Yorkers to register to vote. So hosting voter registrations in public areas along with like in subway stations and some of the organizations I mentioned helped us make sure that every New Yorker had an opportunity to register on National Voter Registration Day. And we've asked the same partners to continue doing voter registration leading into leading up to October 12th. So we're hoping to see more voter registrations coming in. And we had some great press coverage, really sharing the information about where people could register publicly. So overall, it was a successful day, and it was due to the hard work and effort of the team and partners out who consistently come out and show up for us and do voter registration.
Okay, 1 second before Sabrina's finished. So Sabrina also said, you heard her say that the libraries joined us as a partner. And the libraries have joined us in previous years as a partner, but this year, not only did they make sure they were in every single branch, but they went a little further. They allowed us to come in and train their librarians, which is a big feat. And to be able to say that you could go to your local branch and register to vote really beats saying going to the Board of Elections, because there's only one Board of Elections office in every borough. You have a branch in every neighborhood. And other jurisdictions will do this. But it doesn't happen here in New York City. So we were happy that we were able to deliver that for this National Voter Registration Day, to have every single branch of each of the library systems participating actively, being trained, and bringing partners in to help them as well. So I really want to thank the work of Sabrina and Matthew and the rest of the team in making that library piece come to fruition. So thank you.
And just to add, like Anita said, it is a big deal. It's 213 library branches, and it's the New York Public Library, Queens, and Brooklyn branch.
Good evening. My name is Sean O'Leary. I'm the field coordinator at NYC Votes. I wanted to go over some numbers for the GOTV, and I also wanted to take this opportunity to look back over the past 12 months for some of the phone calls, just report some overall numbers. Then I'll look at the September GOTV and then go on to talk about the upcoming GOTV for the November general election. So far, over the past 12 months, we've made over 20,000 calls. We've had over 5,100 conversations. And just to throw in, out of those 5,100 conversations, we spoke to 2,914 people that said yes, they plan on voting. A little more recent, we had the GOTV for the September primary elections. 4 days of calls in this very room. We made 3,076 phone calls. We spoke to 929 individuals, which is a 30% contact rate, which is pretty good. And we had 527 people tell us they planned on voting. We also did something different too in this GOTV. We left messages so people who didn't get the call the first time around could hear about the election and hopefully go to the polls. We will be doing the same thing for the general election in November. The 6th, 5th, 4th, and 3rd, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, Saturday and Sunday, 12 to 4, Monday and Tuesday, 4 to 8. We are already recruiting our partners, Volunteer Match, NYC Service, our own platform of reaching out to volunteers. We have 40 people per day in here, hopefully, making calls. So if anyone would like to volunteer, let me know. I also wanted to talk about the September 22nd voter registration. It was part of our Day of Action initiative. NYC Votes started this program a couple years ago. We worked in different NYCHA developments. We worked with DHS and shelters. And on the 22nd, we were in 3 different shelters: Jamaica Family Residence, Flatland Family Residence, and Linden Men's Shelter. Linden Men's Shelter and Flatland Residence are in Brooklyn. The Jamaica Family Residence is in Queens. Flatlands and Jamaica Family Residences have about 100, 150 families approximately, where Linden Men's Shelter has about 70 individuals. We'd worked with Department of Homeless Services, the Alpha Kappa Alpha Inc., Delta Rho Omega Chapter, the New York Urban League Young Professionals, and the Greater Queens Chapter of the Lynx. We had volunteers from them, plus our own staff and volunteers. We went door to door. We had conversations with residents, registering individuals in these shelters, and arming the people who were moving out with voter forms to register. So when they move to a new location, they can go vote. We answered questions. We worked with the program director to increase voter participation in this community. As part of this, we will be doing another one before the election. This will be a GOTV themed one. The one in September was a voter registration. And on October 27th, Saturday, between 12 and 3, we will be in a location. We are solidifying that location now. I'll be more than willing to talk to people about it, though, offline. And again, we're looking for volunteers. We're going to reach out. We're going to let people know about their voting rights and then arm them with information on their voting rights, where the polling location is, and deliver a nonpartisan voting themed message. And thank you.
Hello, my name is Summer Griffin. I'm the Youth Voter Coordinator with NYC Votes. And I'm going to start by just taking a look back at our summer internship program, which we call the NYC Votes Street Team, made up of 5 college students. The program wrapped up at the end of August, and in the 2 months throughout the summer that we worked with the street team, they managed to collect over 1,500 voter registrations, and over 200 individuals opted in to our election alerts through their activities. So we're very excited about that. Looking forward, we do have a lot of youth civic engagement workshops happening leading up to the November election. I will be working with Pathways to Graduation through the New York City Department of Education, the Queens Library Youth Programs, Rockaway Waterfront Alliance, Participatory Budgeting Youth Fellows, and the Youth Poet Laureate Federal Hall Fellows to provide workshops where we'll give opportunities up until October 12th to register to vote, but also talk about why is it important to vote and how do the elected officials influence the issues we care about. We do have the 10th anniversary 2019 commencement ceremony for the NYC Youth Poet Laureate program happening in November. The event will happen on Monday, November 5th at 7 p.m. It's going to take place at the Intrepid Museum and will feature performances by past NYC Youth Poet Laureates and by the 2019 Federal Hall Fellows. Very excited. Also excited to be launching a new program here in New York called Kids Voting USA. Kids Voting is a nationwide, nonpartisan voter education program that provides election day focused mock voting for kids, as well as lesson plans. Kids Voting is committed to creating lifelong voting habits in children, increasing family communication about citizenship, and encouraging greater adult voter turnout. So we're going to be working with PS20 Anna Silver School to pilot the first program in New York City this month, where their students will be in their student council, will be getting Kids Voting lesson plans, all leading up to their mock election for their student council. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Matthew Pitt, the engagement coordinator, and I'm just going to go over what our agency has done in conjunction with Local Law 29 for the September primary election and what we plan to do in the upcoming general election. So since April of 2018, at least 100 city agency officials have been trained in nonpartisan voter registration, and this is in accordance with Local Law 29. And this covers up to 25 city agencies. The 26th agency, which is the Department of Corrections, will receive their training on October the 9th at Rikers Island. And as a follow-up to make sure that the training does stick with the agency, I've been conducting compliance visits since July of 2018, in which I've already visited about 11 city agency offices. And during these visits, I make sure that the agency's voter coordinator and their outreach staff are aware of what they must be doing, not only in their offices, but also out in public, as it as it regards Local Law 29. And I will publish a final report for calendar year 2018 internally for the Director of Voter Assistance in February of 2019. Now, I also encourage city agencies to go beyond compliance as well, and I'm happy to state that this has been going very well. The Department of Environmental Protection has been consistently hosting voter registration drives throughout the year at their headquarters in Queens. And the last one they hosted was just before the voter registration deadline for the September primary election, which was August 13th, 2018. Also, the Department of Homeless Services, as my colleague Sean here stated, has participated in our Day of Action on September 23rd. And I'm also happy to state that 11 city agencies have participated in National Voter Registration Day on September 25th. Now for our voter spotlights, I'm happy to also report that 22 out of the 26 city agencies have featured our voter spotlights on their websites. And this is these spotlights for the primary election highlighted the change in date of the election from the 11th to the 13th. Also, the spotlights sort of gained a little notoriety of their own as the Manhattan Borough President and the Mayor's Office have actually posted the spotlights on their social media web pages. And also the Department of Citywide Administrative Services has sent the spotlights and other election information to 84 city agencies to share internally with their agency staff. And they've also done the same thing as well today for the general election. Thank you.
Matthew, question. So could you go over again then how many agencies have been trained or will be trained as of October 9th?
All 26 will be trained by October 9th.
I think that's a big feat. That's 100% of the agency who are covered under that law. So thank you very much. And any news to report with TLC and the link system as well?
I was going to leave that for Mr. Solers, but I'm happy to also report that many of you have probably seen a commercial advertising from our agency within a TV taxi. That was due to basically the work that we've been doing with local law 29 agencies such as the Taxi and Limousine Commission, who has been very helpful with getting out the election information to all New York City residents. And also, we've been able to have our advertising as well, highlighting the upcoming elections on the link kiosks as well that you see throughout the city.
The only other thing I wanted to just go back to again is when Summer talked about the 10th anniversary of the Youth Poet Laureate program. And the Youth Poet Laureate program, it is a voter-themed spoken word competition. And saying that we are now in our 10th year and celebrating this anniversary also means that we are saying that we have worked with over 200 New York City students during this time, and that we have also serviced well over 100,000 New York City young people with our messages participating in this program. So I'm very proud for it to reach its 10th year. It has been everywhere from Lincoln Center to, I can't even remember all the places, the 92nd Street Y. I mean, it's been featured in lots of different wonderful locations, and we're very happy that the Intrepid is having us as we celebrate our 10th anniversary. And we're looking forward to our new slate of young poets who will be participating. The poets have performed everywhere from the Library of Congress to Mayor de Blasio's inauguration. So they have messages that are very distinct of their own, not always what we're thinking about, but what they're thinking about. And that's the point of the program, is to help these young people find their voice and to become lifelong voters. So thank you, Summer, for leading this year's efforts. And I think that's it for our reports in terms of the GOTV work that we're doing in preparation for the November elections. And I'll invite up, I think Matt's already here. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you very much. So moving from the in real life world to the digital world, I just wanted to talk about some of the results we saw for our online voter guide for the September primary. They were very, very encouraging, as we would expect from such high turnout in the election. So the online voter guide went live on August 20th. So measuring the number of visitors to the site during that time, we had over 120,000 visitors, which is great. By comparison, last year in 2017, we had about 78,000. So a really nice increase in traffic and the number of visitors there. Just a little bit of detail on where those folks came from. The top source was Google search, so people just searching for this sort of information. And then the second top referrer was our voting.nyc site, which is our microsite that provides 4 buckets of critical information for New Yorkers: read the voter guide, how to vote, where to vote, and online and voter registration. So that was our second top referrer. On voting.nyc, we had a very nice traffic there as well. 77,000 visitors, and our top source of search of traffic there was the direct source. So people literally just dialing in that URL, which is very easy to remember. We did get some very nice earned media before the primary election this year. It was in a lot of broadcasters' mouths, which is really the point of why we developed that site, so that we had a very simple thing for people to remember and something that people would be able to say in a broadcast setting. So that's all very good. In social media, what I should say is that all of these results are higher than what we saw last year in 2017, and that is despite in our terms, much lower marketing budget this time around than we had last year. We were up in subways and buses throughout the primary season in 2017. We were not this year for the primary. We did not have any out of home except for the Link NYC opportunities, the taxi TVs, and some of the nyc.gov television outlets that we had, thanks to Matthew. So what that tells me is that our site, voting.nyc, and the voter guide are really starting to click as a recurring source of information for voters. On the social media aspect, we've been pushing very hard towards Instagram, which is where the young people are. We have a quite nice following on Facebook and on Twitter. We've been pushing very hard to grow our followership on Instagram. And since the beginning of August of this year, we've seen a 30% increase in the people that follow us on that platform. We'd like it to be higher. So if you're on Instagram and you haven't followed us yet, please go do that right now. I think that's about it for the primary at this point. A quick word on November. We will be out with out-of-home advertising in the subways, the buses, starting mid-October. So we will have a fairly large advertising campaign all directed at voting.nyc for the GOTV period in November. So please watch out for that. Thank you.
And I want to point out that one thing that Matt didn't say about the online voter guide, for this primary was for the very first time that for a non-city election, our online voter guide featured profiles of the candidates, and again, we have a much closer relationship with the city candidates, because of the public financing program. So it's, a little more difficult and a lot more effort to get statements from the state candidates. So I want to thank Chase, who was really the person who pushed to get all that data and all of Matt's team, because that really made the voter guide that much more valuable for the public who are hungry for information, and that's about the candidates and who's running.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Amanda, did you want to talk a little bit about the voter statistics? Do you want to explain your chart that you passed out? Sure. Okay. So, yeah. So here, you can have my copy. I will get another one.
Hello, everyone. I'm Amanda Melillo. I'm the Deputy Director of Public Affairs at the Campaign Finance Board, and I'm joined by Katie Garrity, our Policy and Data Research Analyst, to put together these statistics that are in front of you and has been doing a very deep dive over the past few days into election results and what those turnout patterns look like. As Naomi mentioned at the top of the meeting, voter turnout in the primaries this year was almost 3 times higher than in the 2014 primary for governor. And this is primarily on the Democratic side, as there were no top-of-the-ticket Republican races to have a good basis of comparison. But what was some things that were really interesting to us is that turnout was up across the board. And I think that, the big story coming out of the races on election night was essentially that a number of sitting incumbents basically lost their seats to challengers. And there was, I think, a lot of attention paid to, when voters have choices, when people are out there campaigning, that means turnout is going to go up, right? But when we were looking at these results, I think what we were really surprised by is that the Senate races didn't appear to have an impact on turnout overall. People were just turning out more across the board in general. We compared districts where there was no primary versus districts where there was a primary, and there weren't really clear patterns coming out of it. And this is all we could gather from the election results right now. We're waiting for the voter file to come in when we can start to do a much more in-depth analysis that we're going to include in the annual report next year. But I think the takeaway from this, to me at least, is that people are paying more attention to local elections across the board. And I think, it's easy to sort of latch on to the exciting stories coming out on election night, but that doesn't always paint the full picture of what's happening. And it just seemed like, turnout was not being driven by particularly competitive Senate races. I think more people were just going to the polls to actually vote for governor, for attorney general, for their senator, if there was, someone on the ballot. And what we're going to be doing when the history file comes out, and we'll include this analysis in our VAC report, we would like to get a better understanding of who those voters were. Who are the people that were voting in the 2018 primaries that did not vote in the 2014 primaries? Is there anything we can say about them? Are they of a certain age group? Do they live in a particular part of the city? Is this something that's happening across the board? Because I think it can be really interesting, and hopefully we can draw some lessons about how can we get people voting in local elections more frequently. Because, while it's good news that turnout was up 3 times compared to 2014, I think it's still not where we want it to be, right? We're still only talking about about a quarter of eligible voters who are actually coming to the polls. But if we can draw some lessons from this and apply them to elections moving forward, I think there are ways we can nudge that higher.
Thank you. People have questions?
I just want to say what I usually say, which is it's always amazing to me how such a small staff does such amazing work. And it's really critical. And as we all know, excuse me, it's really critical these days. So I just want to thank you for your service.
Oh, and I do just want to note, because we didn't report on this earlier, we did send out our email and text message alerts for this election. We now have an email list of, around the election day, it was about 2,800, and that continues to grow. And we have a text message list of, I think, about 1,050 right now. And we see really high engagement. We send out election alerts a week in advance of all the major deadlines. So we let people know when a registration deadline's coming up, when the absentee application deadline's coming up. We let people know 1 week out from Election Day, hey, Election Day is coming, look up your poll site, check your voter guide. We send people alerts for the day before and a morning alert and an afternoon alert that we sort of target based on whether we know people are actually reading what we send them. So we've actually seen really high engagement off of this. And compared to other benchmarks from government agencies, we're like near the top of people opening our emails, clicking through our emails. This was the first election where we actually asked people on our text list, hey, did you go vote? Text us back, yes, if you did. And we saw an 8% engagement rate, which sounds relatively low if I just say that number, but it's actually more than twice as much as what you typically see in a call to action engagement rate. So, I think we've been really successful so far at sort of building trust with people who are signing up to hear from us on multiple platforms. They're getting quality content, and they're actually engaging with us right back.
So, I think, Amanda, this is really helpful to have these numbers, and thank you for your analysis as well. I think that people are now seeing the importance of state and local government, and with all that's happening around at the federal level. And how important it is, and it's becoming more relevant in people's lives. I think a part of this process, and to what you were saying about having sustained engagement or perhaps even more participation, is continuing to relay that message and to educate people year-round, where we're continuing to do that. And there are some great materials from the Campaign Finance Board and the candid videos, and but also just, I think, the more civic information we can push out to why these elections matter and why the people who sit in those positions making those decisions are relevant to their lives. So I just, I think there is an opportunity. I think there is an opportunity for the Campaign Finance Board and NYC Votes to continue that education process.
Absolutely. And, we've discussed on this committee before how we approach this education through an issue-based way, which I think opens up a way to do it sort of year-round. And this is what gets people hooked, because I think a lot of research has shown if you just stand in front of people and you're like, these offices are important, they aren't necessarily listening to you. But if you connect it to the issues that they care about, which we're striving to do in everything we put together, that really makes an impact. And if you see some of sort of the most high energy organizing happening around the country right now, it's almost entirely issue-based, things that people care about, and especially I think you see with youth right now, that they're using that as the gateway of we care about these specific issues, and we're going to get people our age from our generation to register and vote because they care about this issue too. So I think that's something we're going to continue to work in.
Well, that's a good segue to, we have two speakers today to talk about their efforts to talk to the voters and engage them in two kind of very interesting and unique ways. So we have Rachel Conowitz from Motivote, which is a digital platform created by grad students at NYU Wagner, which is to increase, their goal is to increase turnout among young voters. And basically their methodology is to make a game, which is always fun. And then we also have Melody Lopez, who with the New York Civic Engagement Table, which is a statewide collaboration of community organizing and issue organizing groups, which they're trying to be a driver of social change and encouraging more people to be civically engaged throughout the year. So why don't you join us at the table to speak? Thank you for coming. You don't necessarily have to speak in that order, whichever way you want. You can both come over here, one other, doesn't matter. All I ask is that you press.
Either way.
Yeah, and all I ask is that you press the button so that the light turns green, so that you can be caught on the video.
Hi, thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Rachel Conowitz. I'm the COO and one of the co-founders of Motivote, which is dedicated to making voting fun, easy, and social so that everyone and young people in particular actually do it. So as you mentioned, we founded this coming out of NYU Wagner, where we all graduated from last year, and following the 2016 election and seeing that young people were still voting at less than 50%, we were looking for a way to address this. And what Motivote does is really focus on what we call micro barriers. So there are a lot of reasons that people and young people aren't voting, including structural barriers in some places, voter ID laws, or just the difficulties of registering. But what we're really focused on is helping people overcome the little things that happen in their lives that keep them from voting, because voting is not part of your everyday routine. So you don't have a plan, you get busy, you have a test, or you're busy at work and you don't show up on election day. Or, we do a great job here with the voter guide in New York City, but in a lot of places, it's very hard to find the information on your candidates. You feel overwhelmed and people don't show up. So we are based on using behavioral science to make it fun and easy, so people work with their friends to hold each other accountable to make sure that they vote. So the way it works is people form teams with their friends, they commit to vote in the upcoming election, and then work together to do a set of tasks that get them prepared. So really simple things like looking up their sample ballot, putting it on their calendar, making a plan to vote, things that have been shown by political science research to increase the likelihood that you're going to vote. And for taking those actions, we reward them with points, which then can be redeemable for entries into raffles to win real life rewards. So we're gamifying that piece of the process, and then they and their friends hold themselves accountable to actually voting on election day. Young people in particular, people are sharing their selfies already with their I voted sticker. So we have them share it on their platform. So there's a sense of shared accountability. You've not just told your friend they should vote, but you actually are checking in to make sure that they've done it. And when everyone votes, your team, quote unquote, wins. The good feeling that you've all achieved something together and participated in democracy. And so we launched this officially last May, and we're running our first pilots here in New York for the 2 sets of primary elections, and have seen some really promising early results. So we had about 200 to 250 people participate in Motivote over the last 2 primaries, and saw 87% of our participants confirmed their vote with us, which we were really excited about. But what we were more excited about is the folks who are irregular primary voters. So folks who don't usually vote in the primaries, they self-reported that they hadn't voted in at least one of the last 2 primaries, and people typically over-report their voting rather than under-report it. 92% of those folks confirmed their vote with us. So we are confident that if you can get people to do these things and get on our platform, that we're making a difference. We also saw that our voters under and over 30 voted at the same rate, which we were also very excited about, since there's typically a 20 to 30% or point gap between the rates of young people. So we are continuing to focus on this moving forward into the general election, both here in New York and in other areas around the country, to make sure over the next month that young people are getting prepared and turning out to vote. There was a poll that came out, I think today, from Gallup that showed that only 26% still of people under 30 are sure that they're going to vote this November. And if you go up to the next age group, that's 55%. And so we are really focused on helping to close that gap and make sure that everyone who registered across this voter registration day is actually turning out, since young people are the most likely to register and then not show up. I have some information also that I can hand out to people, and I'm happy to answer questions as well.
I'd be happy to see it.
So, any questions?
Yeah, I guess what lessons did you guys take away from this as far as what worked, what did not, and what are you thinking about tweaking? This looks like a design thinking type project.
Yes, we definitely started from going out to talk to other young people about the reasons that they weren't voting, and that's kind of how we came to this, that people were telling us, I know I should vote, I'm intending to, and it just isn't happening. And I think the thing that we have really focused in on and learned through this is that having someone on the team who is the person who is really dedicated to this and is interested in voting, it can be a really big driver for getting everyone else. So we knew already that a reminder from a friend is something that tends to work, but having the person who's leading the team, so to speak, be the person who cares about voting the most helps to drive people to take these other actions. So we're continuing to look at ways to how we can incentivize or reward these leaders to motivate their teams to take more action, to make sure they're following through on election day. And we've also found just that partnering with other organizations is a really good way to find those people and they're able to activate their networks outside of those active groups. I think a lot of voter registration and getting people engaged often happens in circles of people who are already pretty engaged, and we think that because you're engaging your friends, it's a good way to kind of move outside of those circles.
And did you get this funding for this through a grant or through seed funding or like?
So we've gotten some funding through grant, like startup grant funding through a program we participated in NYU, and then have also done friends and family seed funding for that as well.
It's really great.
Thank you. Yeah, wonderful work.
Oh, it's somebody in.
Do you want to come up?
I'm sorry. Are you going to ask a question about motive? Oh, okay. I was like, because we're willing to hear your testimony in order. If you would, go come. Okay.
Most of the I commend you for the but most of the common sentiment is that nothing happens after our vote. So, what is your approach to that?
So it's a tricky question with the idea that people not feeling that their vote matters, and I don't know that Motivote, we're trying to educate people along the way and show them how their vote can make a difference. And I think, particularly focusing on local elections, there's a lot of opportunity there to show people, these races are decided by just a few votes. But there are a set of people, I think, who are just not feel like their vote doesn't matter and they're not going to vote. And we may not be able to change their mind, but the more we can do to educate people and the more young people that vote, the more responsive government is to their needs. And we're trying to, as we go along and make this process fun for people, also engage them in those types of ideas that if you vote, you can make your voice heard. So it's definitely a tricky problem because it, especially in New York, it can sometimes be hard to see your one vote because things tend to go a certain way often, but
not necessarily, though. I mean, there's many elections that are very close sometimes, especially in primaries. But I do think that a part of the conversation also is helping them understand that it's not a one-time effort. It's constant engagement with those who are either seeking office or once they've obtained office to share your concerns or your community's concerns or your family's concerns with that individual and with others, and to know that it's through that engagement and that education that things happen. So this is just one part of the process of our democracy. It doesn't end with being there on election day. It means consistent engagement. Right.
yeah, I agree with all that. We're right now just focused on getting people to the polls, but are considering how we can also help people engage in broader civic action once they've done that.
Seems like a nice segue to the work that you do.
Yeah, it's a good segue. So thank you all for having me here this evening. Excited to talk about our work at the New York Civic Engagement Table. Once again, my name is Melody Lopez. I'm the director of the Civic Engagement Table. The New York Civic Engagement Table started in about 2010. That was much smaller back then, and we've grown a lot over the past few years. And we're now about 60 partner organizations that work across the state of New York in multiple regions, not everywhere, but in a few places. Here in New York City, Long Island, the Hudson Valley, and in Buffalo. And sort of the overarching mission of our organization is to increase the vote share of communities of color, low-income people, and young people. And all of the organizations that we work with have that intention in mind. And to work with a wide cross-section of organizations, some large statewide grassroots organizations, some very, very small volunteer-based groups, service providers, good government organizations, folks that have varying kinds of missions and work on different issues, but all have the shared understanding that increasing the engagement of these communities is a path towards building kind of more representation, and also just winning on policy issues, because if the folks are supporting the issues and they're voting, there's a better chance that folks will actually elect people who may be able to move on all the issues that organizations are working on. And the way that we do that is we provide data, technology, training, and also convene the groups regularly for shared planning, shared strategy. And so what that looks like is every organization that we work with gets access to the voter file through our organization and able to learn how to build phone lists, just kind of the actual work of doing voter engagement and the technology that enables groups to do that work. So we kind of created economies of scale within our organization so that folks who are smaller, who may not be able to afford those types of tools on their own, can access them and utilize them for their programs. And so what that looks like is right now, kind of some highlights from this past primary. We had 33 organizations conducting GOTV for the September primary. 21 of those were here in New York City. So the vast majority of our groups are here in New York City, which makes sense because that's where the density is and a lot of folks doing a lot of different kinds of work. And the tactics that folks used ranged from phone banking, canvassing, texting, and reached a total of, or kind of tried to reach about 362,000 people across the state. And the largest amount of that was through our texting program. And so when I say texting, we're talking more about what we call peer-to-peer texting. So not like sort of a blast text message conversation. And one of our partners, I have to give them a very specific shout out, Common Cause New York did about 200,000 of those text messages. So they had a very large program, and we sort of filled in the rest. And we'll probably be doing something even larger for the general election. And of that, we got about 17,000 pledges to vote in our work. And yeah, so that's sort of some of the overarching kind of scale that we're working at. And I think one of the things that's unique about the Civic Engagement Table and our model is that
we have big groups and small groups, and it's sort of, we're able to sort of look by providing the data and technology and being sort of helping them be stewards of their data and collecting what the data and the outcomes of the work that they're doing. We're able to actually see what impact we're having collectively, and not just one single organization sort of feeling like they're out there on their own trying to make some move things. And so actually one of the things that we've been able to do is sort of track what groups have done over the years. And currently we have what we kind of call our voter base. And what that is just folks who over the years, over election or issue campaigns, have pledged to vote or have turned out to meetings or have signed up to become a member of an organization. And that's about 663,000 people across the state, and 367,000 of them are here in New York City. And we're hoping, and sort of the scale that folks are working at has increased year after year. So our goal is by 2021, 22 to be about 1 million voters, and that we can kind of count on to be folks that we can move, that are the organizations we're working with, feel that they're engaged, voting in elections, and also maybe beyond voting in elections, just building out more leaders in communities. And sort of this is just one sort of the first step of a broader, longer term ladder of engagement, having folks become voters and civically engaged, and maybe have them come to public meetings like this one and be able to, further engage with their community. And so that's kind of what we're, of course, we also do voter registration, which I neglected to mention. I talked a lot about GOTV. And about this year we have a little bit of a data entry backlog, so we have about 20,000, but I don't think that's accurate. I think it's a little underestimated, but that's approximately what we've done for this year of 2018, and that's pretty good. We'll probably be about 30,000 by the end of the year, and so that's kind of where was I? And also the thing that's really critical for our approach is that it's also the idea of year-round civic engagement, where it's not only about engaging only on the election, and the idea that it is important to engage in all elections, no matter, obviously now there's folks, we talked a lot of exciting conversation about the increase in turnout, and for this election cycle in the primary, because there were so many competitive elections, state Senate races and competitive gubernatorial primary, and so that lot of news. But the idea that we should always be engaging folks in civic engagement beyond just the election day, beyond only worrying, beyond just like the month of October or the month of August for the primary. And so that's something that is really part of the ethos of how we approach the work at the civic engagement table. And the last thing I'll say is, we certainly focus a lot on the mechanics of outreach and helping organizations build their own capacity to do that. But we're also working with groups to sort of change some of the structural challenges to voting, because that's also a challenge. And I know, our sort of goal to engage people, educate them on the importance of voting and why it matters, but also maybe advocate for changes that will make it easier for folks to vote as well. And all of the organizations that we work with are really committed to that. So I'll just stop there because I can keep going, but I'll just pause right there.
I have a question. Yeah. So it seems like, a strategy that both you and Rachel have found useful is to find, team leaders or community leaders or civic leaders, shall we say, whatever the term might be. What strategies do you use when your partner organizations, do they self-identify people? Or is it something that you're cultivating, you're identifying people, or how does that work? And then the second question I have is, how do you, raise the important point of, persistent or consistent education and advocacy on the part of individuals? What is your organizational process in helping people or communities, whether it's in Buffalo or in Poughkeepsie, sitting down and identifying what are the issues that may or may not be important to them, and then who are the people who are responsible for making decisions on those issues, and kind of like the game plan on how to go about changing policy? How does that work?
Two very easy processes, right? No, I'm just kidding. So first thing is, in terms of the leadership development, that's actually really central to our work. And we have, one thing I didn't mention in my comments is we actually have a leadership development pipeline program that our organization has developed. And we have someone who's a wonderful training director who has created curriculum and program to support that. And it's something that we offer to all of our partner organizations. And what that looks like in practice is it's often folks, we try our best to work with the organizations that are based in the community, because they either have their members or their constituencies, and they have the relationships to identify the folks who may be the right fit for our kind of program. And I know, and there's of course other sort of leadership development opportunities within organizations and all sorts of different kinds of programs. And so ours is really about actually related to your second question, helping folks have a shared understanding and definitions of how government works, how change happens, sort of looking at, it's actually a 4-week program, 4 Saturdays over in a row. So it's quite a commitment for folks who are participating. And we do look at some of those questions because it is really critical for folks. And I think that's actually part of the challenge of getting folks to engage generally is not having any sense of how things work and feeling, not knowing what sort of top issues that the city has purview over versus the state versus the federal government, and just kind of having that basic knowledge where you feel empowered to feel that you can engage with those different entities. And so that's actually part of our leadership development program. We have a whole session on kind of demystifying government for folks. So it's mostly working in partnership with the groups that we work with to kind of have them identify folks who would be a good fit, who are, and then they actually have to apply and share, express their interest in participating, and commit as much as possible, of course, understanding that life happens to all 4 sessions. But yeah, and then in terms of your second question about kind of, I'm trying to make sure I understand. I remember exactly. Could you just remind me exactly what your second question was?
Sure. I mean, just, how, you kind of.
Yeah, I kind of touched on it, but I didn't
already.
Quite
but it was helpful for me to understand just that it's like, for example, it's a 4 meeting process, and that there is, a civic education component to it, because I think for many communities, whether it's from communities of color or from immigrant communities, there may not be as, even people here, there isn't as clear of an understanding as to who is responsible for what issues that impact you, whether it's something that's happening in your public school to, something in City Hall, or the state has jurisdiction on that matter, in which case you have to advocate with officials who are in Albany. Or for that matter, regulatory bodies. I think people sometimes don't know that agencies are responsible for so much as well. So
yeah,
it was just
totally. Yeah, I did kind of touch upon it. I just wanted to make sure I addressed it fully. But absolutely, yes. And our leadership development program is just one space where that education happens. But we also just have broadly, curriculum on just Civics 101. We've found, especially working with broad section of organizations, that it's a huge gap, and a lot of folks, it's just a really important starting point. It's very hard to have the conversation about why voting matters if you don't know. It feels like it's kind of going into a vacuum, and you're like, okay, I don't know what happens. This person comes into office, and what do they do, and how do I hold them accountable? And so I think that we found that to be a really critical piece of the puzzle for us, and we've worked with many of our partners to help them build out curriculum around that.
When was your organization founded, and Where does your funding come from?
So we were founded in 2010. I mean, when I say founded, it was very. I mean, we're still very small. Including myself, we're a 5-person team. So we're still small. It was 2 people when it was founded. Scrappy, exactly. So yes, and we were actually, when we were founded in 2010, it was actually some of our core partners saw this model in other parts of the country and thought that this was something that would be really helpful here in New York. And so that's kind of how we were founded, and most of our funding comes from foundation grants.
Thank you.
Well, thank you guys for coming and sharing with us. Are there more questions for panelists? Thanks. Thank you all for the work that you do, because encouraging people to get involved is hard and important work. Okay. We also invited members of the community, if there are people who, had issues with at the polling sites in the September or in the June primaries, who would like to share their concerns with the committee. And, I welcome anyone who would like to speak to come forward. You can sit here. If there's anyone in the audience who has issues to share. No, you don't have to, but there don't have to be any issues about any voting issues. But okay, well, thank you all for coming. I think that concludes our meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.